Not literally, I hope.
All right, go ahead and kick it off, Jen.
All right. Well, Nate, since this is kind of a joint venture, I'm not sure if you want to do the first kickoff for Intermountain.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Sam and from our group at DataJoin talked to Jen a while back about, hey, let's do a joint session. So, everybody on the west side, we said let's meet up with the east side. So, in case you don't know what NOAM stands for, that's the North America East Group, OGS, which is led by Jen Dungan. And I'll just go ahead and give an introduction for Jen. She's giving this wonderful presentation today, which we were sort of debating where is Elm Street located? Is it in the east or the west? I Googled it, and it's in Ohio. So, it's the east. It's good. So this is very fitting. Many of you know Jen, and for those of you who don't, maybe from the west side of things, she has been an AA champion for some time now, just a great advocate for Adobe Analytics. Also the GNOME East leader. So she leads out this chapter on the East US. And then she's also been part of a mentorship program with Adobe that's been very helpful to people in the Experience League. And most of all, she's just a wonderful, fantastic, talented human being. And so we're just so glad to have her presenting today. And she can walk through the intro slide that she has and talk about her costume and whatever else. So turn it over to you, Jen. Take it away.
Well, thank you, Nate. Oh, all right. So basically, well, we figured we had to do something special for a Halloween event. So what better than talking about the horrors of migration? Because we've all been there. And if you haven't been there, consider yourself lucky. It's never a fun job when somebody wants to migrate your site. So that's what we're going to focus on today. So just do a little introduction for myself. I mean, Nate gave me a great introduction. So I am located, Torstar in Toronto, Ontario. So I'm Canadian. That's also maybe scary for some of you, but we'll forgive you. And I started as a web developer. Then I moved into QA, and then I finally took over the web analytics. But for all that time, I was doing analytics throughout the process because I was in very small teams. So I was doing double duty. I was either implementing it or I was testing for it and, working with, specialists, learning from them, and then finally coming up with everything from scratch on my own. I also handle the Google Analytics and the Parsley Analytics in our organization, plus all the pixel trackers. So I got my fingers in a lot of different things. And in addition to being passionate about analytics, I enjoy reading, playing video games, and DIY projects around the house. And as you can probably tell, I am an avid crafter. I crochet and sew like little amigurumi characters. I do original Halloween costumes. I do Halloween costumes based on known characters, sometimes fully original. So yes, this costume I made myself with my mom's help. So there we go. So let's dive right into the presentation.
It's a pretty great costume. I think we got to give her a hand for that. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Oh, we got the applause and hearts going up on the screen. Okay, good. Okay, carried away.
All right. So first thing that always comes to our mind when we talk about horror stories, you've been told you're migrating sites. And this is for everyone, whether you're in analytics, a developer, your business, your marketing, everyone always gets this look on their face going, oh, dear God, no. But it's going to happen. You've probably been through it. You're probably going to have to do it at some point. These are some tips that will be helpful to you. So in my case, I think I hit the trifecta or quadfecta or whatever it may be on mine, because I had to migrate 30 sites from 3 different code bases and 2 different CMSs. I had to migrate 3 mobile apps. Luckily, they were staying on React Native from the coding perspective, but it was all new data sources from the CMS. We had all new backend, which none of us were familiar with. all new front end with proprietary coding. Both of the above were all, new technology. No one in our organization knew how to use it. So it was all learning from all sides. Halfway through the POC to see if this was even viable, a decision was made that we are going to launch that POC to production. So that in itself was a real scramble to make sure that things were working and ready to go. And our original timeline was supposed to be 5 months for all of this. Basically, everyone kind of took one look at that and said, no, you're not going to make that. And we didn't. I will absolutely be clear about that. We did not make 5 months. And then, of course, during this time, that was when the Universal Analytics sunset notification came on the board. So not only did I have to worry about migrating all of our analytics, our Adobe analytics, I had to work with a whole new technology of GA4. So as you can see, this is about as horror story as it gets. So now, what were my resources? Hopefully you have a little bit more than my MacGyvering, because there was me, obviously. I had one junior support person on my team who was still learning, and that was it. That was my resources to work with. So this project done on a very, very slim resource platform. And hopefully you won't have to do it quite so bare bones as I had. Now, when it came to this, I had a decision to make. Was I going to stick with client side, or was I going to go the web SDK route? And I had to balance the options, stick with what I know, or go with the new technology, something that I was definitely going to have to work on anyway. But as you can see, based on those timelines, based on the fact that I had so much that was unknown already, I ended up choosing to go client side. Not the ideal choice. I would love to have gone web SDK right from the start, but I've made a plan that I'm going to go web SDK probably early next year to mid next year, when I've got stuff finalized, stable, and just ready to actually dig into the new technology. Those decisions may not work for you. If you've got the resources and you feel you've got the time to do the web SDK, by all means, push forward, because that's where things are going. But, sometimes you have to make concessions. It's a fact. So the first thing is, when I started, I reviewed everything. Now, I had good documentation to start. Not every company does. But even with that, I reviewed every single one of my documentation pieces. I double checked that the site functionality and all the current rules in launch were working, were doing what they should, just making sure that I knew exactly what I was going from to what I had to replicate. I also reviewed notes on improvements that I had planned for future development, because there's always a backlog of stuff that I want to improve. Little tweaks here, improvements there. Maybe something's not quite working to the optimal level that I want. This is a good opportunity to take those factors in and make sure I'm building them into the new system. Again, time permitting. And because I was doing so many sites and rolling out, I had to make sure that I wasn't destroying the documentation I had. So I actually started with all new documentation. I would look at the old, copy what was relevant, bring it into the new, and then update it to reflect the new sites, so that I always had what was still there, untouched, and then start to work on the new. And then I could also do a comparison back and forth to make sure I hadn't missed anything. Because once you start destroying or changing your existing documentation, you might accidentally remove something that you really needed. And you have, hopefully you've got a history of change requests, but it's still a little bit harder than just having two documents up side by side doing a comparison. I also started an all new launch property. Starting with a new code base, it just made sense. Again, copying what rules were relevant, or what coding I had that was relevant, and bringing it over one by one. It may seem like the long process, but it was the safest choice. Again, every migration is going to be different. You have to analyze for yourself what you think you're going to need, and then, make the decision and move forward. And of course, there's so many factors that are going to go into that kind of decision that you have to look at it yourself. The other thing is that, and I see questions coming in, and that's great. I'll address questions at the end, but keep them coming. And Nate, if you want to sort through those and just make sure we don't miss any when we get to the end, that would be great. Learning from the past. No implementation is perfect. I mean, as good as you're getting, there's always going to be, stuff that isn't quite right. So, checking out what was working, making sure that you knew what was working so that you could replicate it. What could be improved? Analyzing, what improvements could you make? What tweaks could you make? What wasn't quite the easiest to work with in the back end system? Working with your teams to figure out what was and what wasn't working for them. So you're not a silo on your own. You have to talk with business and make sure that they're aware of any potential changes coming through. I had business people using Adobe directly. I have data team members pulling data into the data lake and processing it. So I had to make sure that I was keeping everything aligned for everyone while taking everyone's considerations into this project. The other thing is, where could I shave off server calls? And this is a cost saving effectively. Server calls are what our contracts are based on. The more server calls you use. Now, again, if you're not going over your limits, you're probably okay. If you're cutting it really close to where your limit is, anywhere where you can shave off server calls means you're not going to go over for overages in the next year or on your contract at the end of the year. But also, where can you start doing additional tracking, a balancing of server calls, dropping server calls that aren't needed here, doing them in a more efficient way, and then, getting those server calls back so that you can use them for other more interesting projects. And then where can I make things more efficient? And this, again, we're still talking about efficiency, but this one is from a code efficiency perspective. Me personally, I have a lot of custom code. Not everyone's going to, but it was, where could I make the code run a little bit faster? Where could I make it a little bit easier to read and to update? Because again, a system that's running for several years, it tends to get, oh, I need this change here, I need that change here. The code starts to get a little bloaty. So it was a good chance to go through and rewrite the code more efficiently to kind of start from a really nice, clean baseline. And then what are the fundamental differences between the old site and the new? Because when you're migrating, you rarely have everything one-to-one. New technologies, it's going to have something else. In my case, being a news organization, we had walls, but the walls were being triggered in a completely different way. The wall information had different pieces to it. So it was checking out what those fundamental differences were, analyzing it and saying, okay, what can I do that will keep my wall tracking comparable, but take into account the new stuff and drop the old stuff that was no longer relevant. So it was a lot of considerations and making sure that I had a plan moving forward before I even started. Now, getting to work. This is where, now that you've done the reviews and you've kind of got your mind solidified into what needs to be done, this is where you actually have to start working. And again, there's a balance between getting that solid base of core tracking with your core critical functions, because in a very short timeline, it's unlikely you're going to get 100% of tracking. So you need to be sure that you've got enough to get you your basic reports, enough to get you some of your in-depth reports. Again, walls, subscriptions, purchases, campaigns, all of that core tracking needs to be there, but you need to have the bare bones, the base of the pages tracked so that you have those correlations. So it was, again, a balancing act between making sure that you had enough to get through an MVP, most valuable player of your analytics, so that more people were happy. I mean, no one's going to be 100% happy because someone's going to lose something, but as long as you can follow it up later with a, yes, we're going to cover it, it's on the plan, you make sure that you got your bases covered, because everyone's in a panic at this point. One of the ways that makes all this massive amount of work easier is to split the work into smaller pieces, setting goals to complete items by specific times, just making sure that you're kind of encapsulating it into these pieces so it doesn't look like one big, massive, oh my God, I have to do everything. It's, I need to focus on this, then I need to focus on this, and then I need to focus on this. You're going to get to that big picture one way or the other, but it's a lot less strain on yourself if you've broken it into small pieces. And then after something was done, I had to continue to review it to make sure nothing else down the line was breaking it, particularly since the developers were changing code, functions were changing. I couldn't rely on something that I had finished today was going to be working in a month, because somebody may have changed that base code and broken what I had done. So it was a constant source of make a change, review, make a change, review, go back, review the entire thing, make sure everything was still working, keeping aligned with our developers and whatever developers were working on, so that I knew sort of what pieces of code they were touching, so that I'd have an understanding of what really needed to be reviewed in a triage situation to make sure that everything was still green on my side. And then documenting as I went. Like, even if it's partial documentation, knowing what you've done and what's still pending is really critical, as well as going back and doing the big full document. If you haven't been documenting the little pieces, you might forget those details. So trying to keep a running total of what you've done, how you did it, and even point form about what needs to be documented, it's going to help you in the long run to make sure that your final documentation is complete and is good for the rest of the team to use. And then again, with a short timeline, we had to make concessions due to time constraints. So some features of the site weren't actually released with the initial go live. Keeping on top of that with the project team to know what I should be focusing on and what I shouldn't be. There was no point in me spending time trying to figure out tracking for feature X if feature X wasn't even going to be there on the first release. So I had to keep in touch, going, what's there and what's not. And then, of course, given the time constraints of the new technology, there were some things that I knew I couldn't figure out, or I was having a hard time figuring out how to track right off the bat. So I had to make sure I was in constant communication with people saying, okay, I plan on tracking this, but I can't do it right now. I just don't have the resources to do it. Making sure that people were clear about what wasn't going to be there when you went live, so that nobody panicked the day of. And as I said, keeping on top of the team, staying on with the rollouts, what features were being rolled out. And I hate to say it, but it happens more often than not. Features that I was told early on wouldn't be part of the release, 2 weeks before the release, hey, guess what? They're there now. So, it was kind of a scramble to make sure I had tracking or partial tracking, or just said, sorry, you didn't give me enough time. Things like that. Again, I'm sure you've all been there, because project scope always seems to change as the project is ongoing, and what you release usually isn't what you were told was going to be released at the time. So the next thing is make sure you have a plan in place for having all the reports that are needed for go live. Because right after a migration, every team is going to be so focused on what's happening with this. Where's our traffic going? You know, did we lose traffic? Did we gain traffic? Are we still getting ranked by search engines? Are we still getting social media? Are we still getting this? Are we still getting that? Make sure you've got a plan in place, even pre-building reports so that they're available when you go live, so that all your teams are happy. And one thing that you can do is, again, using the annotations to denote where on your reports that go live date was. You know, for me, I actually had, 30 sites split over about 14 or 15 releases. We were releasing only a couple of sites at a time, so I had a lot of different, waypoints to actually mark. Now, you could always do this, Adobe's default annotations. Me personally, I don't really like that visualization. No offense to Adobe, I don't find this very visual. So you can always go a little bit more creative and do something like this. So this is my annotation design, and I'll show you how to do this in a second. But to me, this is very visual, showing the pre and post go live dates, denoted by a nice color separation, and people can really see what's happening between, your old code and your new. So to show you how to do this, let's do a little 101. So the first thing you need to start is to create a date range. And for me, I would just create a fixed date for the go live date, and then a rolling up to the current date, so that no matter what report we're pulling, whether we're pulling it by every day, every couple of, every week, whatever you're doing post migration, that colored line is going to go from that fixed point and keep rolling up to align with, when you're pulling the reports today. The next thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create a segment using that date range. And I know this is going to look really weird. It's literally a hit level segment with a date range, nothing else. Because you'll see how it gets used in a second, but you don't actually need any additional logic. Just there's the go live date, and this is it. Very simple. And now you're going to build this into a calculated metric. So you can see that I'm using if logic. So I do if, and then my logical test is that segment for the date range has page views. So that's it. I'm just looking for, is there any data during this date range? If there is, my value of true just matches that metric. So if I have page views, within this date range, then return back to me the exact same page views. If I don't, I'm just going to return a static number of 0. And so when you actually put this into your free-form table, just make sure that you change your column settings to interpret 0 as no value. What that's going to do is that's going to prevent on your line, if you've ever seen your data going from 0 to a number, usually it goes along and it kind of has an angled jump from 0 to numbers across the day. Interpreting 0 as no value is going to ensure that perfectly straight up and down line. So there's going to be no value, and then there's going to be values. And it'll just look something like this when you put it into your freeform table, no values, and then values on the post go live, and side by side with your page views. And you can clearly see that from July 9th, the random date that I selected for this example, you can see the numbers are exactly the same in both columns after that go live date. And what that's going to allow, and I'll just show it again in a slightly larger format, it's going to allow that graph of metrics going along and that area to overlay directly with the page views. So that's why we wanted the original value, if true, to be set to the same metric. So there's no deviation, there's no up, there's no down. It just overlays right over top of your existing table. And this gives you a really, really nice visual view of what's happening. And then you can always add descriptions to your chart about the go live date if you really want to specify it was July 9th, if you don't want people to try and guess where this is in your chart. So with that, I mean, I've covered like most of what I went through. Now it's time for questions, and I know there were some coming in, so I guess we can jump right into that.
Okay, one of the first questions was, well, there was a comment about Ohio because, Elm Street. Okay, good. So Jeff's from Ohio. Okay, good. And some folks from Toronto too. So, okay, you got some good fans. Toronto fans, yay.
Woo!
Okay, George asks, what do you define as migrating a site? An AEM site or any website?
Any website. In my case, we were actually migrating from AEM to a system called Blocks, which probably none of you have ever heard of, and I don't blame you. Blocks is kind of, it's a CMS that's designed kind of for newspaper sites. So unless you're in the newspaper business, you probably haven't heard of it. I'm not quite sure what the rationale moving away from AEM was. Sorry, Adobe, wasn't my call. But essentially, that's what we did. But this could be a migration from anything. It could be WordPress to AEM. It could be a React Native system using any old CMS to something else. A migration just means you're going from one code base to another, and it could be a front-end migration. It could be a back-end migration. It could be both, like in my case, because our front end is also on the Blocks infrastructure. So we actually had AEM React to Blocks in both sense. So, but again, the same sort of steps would be taken on any kind of site migration. And I don't know if you have any follow-ups or additional questions about that or not. Before we move on to the next question.
Looks like we can move on to the next question.
Okay.
From Scott, what did you use to capture the documentation? Something like Confluence, Bitbucket, or something else?
Right. So technically, in my case, I'm basically using Google Docs. I have a large Word document, and I'm going to show my geekdom here. So I'm just going to hide under my hood. But my original documentation for our AEM site was 559 pages. Yeah. Very long. And then I use an amendment, like a spreadsheet that is kind of what I call my cheat sheet. So I've got my Word document, which has basically sample code, explanations of.
I think you hit mute, Jen. Just heads up.
I don't know how I did that. I am so sorry. When did I mute?
I was going to say, to help you out there, Jen, we actually did a session on our documentation a while back too. If anybody wants to refer to that, we can send them to that.
We absolutely can. Yes. So I don't know where I muted, but in my case, I was using Google Docs. So I had a Word document with, in my old system, 550 some pages. I'm still using Google Docs, so it's information about all of the elements that I'm capturing, sample code of my data layers and what I expect the developers to give me, an output table showing, for QA as well as any analytics people who want to build reports, what kind of information is expected at each page level, as well as at a global level. Again, how you do your documentation is totally up to you. You don't have to go as insane as me. And then I have a Google spreadsheet, which has multiple different tabs. I have one that outlines all of the parameters, the dimensions, props, evars, events, everything that is in use on the site, with columns for description and what the format I'm expecting is, and what the retention period on the evars is, and any other notes and information that is valuable to have for every single thing on the site, but then I have additional tabs that might say, oh, here's information about, what our hierarchies look like. Here's information about what processing rules are being used for our mobile app and what parameters and events are being passed in each one of them. So it's a very kind of full document where I can try to capture as much as possible about everything that's going on in our sites. But we also do have Confluence. Normally, because my documents are so large, Confluence just didn't work for what I was trying to do. And while I could have done a separate Confluence page per page on the site, because I like to be able to review and make sure that everything is consistent, for me to try and flip back and forth between Confluence pages was not the most efficient use of my time. So I kind of like the Word document. And then I just post links to those documents within my Confluence. But you don't have to listen to what I do for documentation. What works for you is always going to be best for you and your organization, because it fits your style of working. It fits your developer style of working. It fits your needs. Anything that is customized to you is always going to be better than trying to follow somebody else's formula. And oh, thank you, Jeff. I just see you posted that event for us. Great.
Okay, great. It looks like the next question from Deb is, we are maintaining 2 tag properties for the old site versus the new site. As we have a multi-phase migration plan, is there a way to export the launch rules to compare old versus new rules?
I have not seen a way to necessarily compare. I know that launch itself has compare revisions. So, I mean, in theory, you could probably copy a rule from property A to property B and then completely rewrite it and then use that first revision as that comparison. But I don't know if that's going to cause additional headaches or issues. But I mean, that's the only comparison I can think of that's available out of the box within launch. I also tend to like to have just 2 tabs open in 2 different monitors. So, property A, like, original, and property B, new, and doing a side-by-side comparison. It's not going to catch everything because it's all manual. And then maybe I'll augment it by having Notepad++, where I can copy out custom code segments into individual tabs and then run a compare on them. So for those of you not familiar, there's a Notepad tool for Windows called Notepad++. It is much superior to the Windows Notepad. It has a lot of plugins such as compare, JSON formatting, XML formatting. You can show and hide special characters. You can word wrap. You can not word wrap. You can do a whole bunch of development in it. And you can even choose the language that the Notepad is showing the data in. So if you're doing JavaScript, you can actually switch it to use JavaScript color coding, so it's easier to read. So essentially, that's kind of the tools that are at my disposal. I'll copy and paste and I'll do comparisons outside of Adobe, or I'll do side-by-sides. Or as I said, if you really want to try using the Adobe tools, you could attempt to copy rules from one property to another and then use revision 1 as that comparison base of revision compare. I hope that helps.
Just
Okay,
like
great.
a follow-up question on that,
yeah.
if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would also vouch for the Notepad++. The idea is that we've set up these rules which are essential in the new site, and we want to look at from the old site what else can we bring over which would make sense.
Mhm.
Would you do that in the solution design phase, or would you think about what worked for the old site and then bring that over? Like, what would you do? Because we're trying to get all the launch rules that are essential over to the new tag property.
Right. And that's where kind of that first step review comes into. You're right, because you probably want literally everything.
Yeah.
But depending on what changes have happened, certain data may not be available. Like you may have had in your old system, you may have had a key for, I'm just going to say, maybe it was a custom GUID on a property, and now it's a SKU. Like the naming could be different, the formatting of the information could be different. Like you might be going from a 16-bit GUID to a 36-bit GUID, like, SKU. There could be various differences, and that's where the analysis has to come into play. Like, that you still want to track it. Do you want to track it into the same EVAR? Do you want to separate it out? Do you want to, do you have to, how much code do you have to change to make sure that you're grabbing the proper value from the new site and bringing it in? And that's one of the reasons why I kind of brought rules over one by one and reviewed them really in depth to go, is this still work? I mean, my code base is so different. What I'm trying to read doesn't even exist. I have different cookies. I have different session storage names. I have different, DOM level elements. As much as I hate to do DOM, I am sad to say that in this migration, I had to do a lot of DOM extractions because I couldn't get the support that I needed from the developers in the short timeline to get stuff. So I have to go back and actually change those from DOM to a proper, data form. But that's, without actually seeing your site, it's kind of hard to, advise you one way or the other, aside from just, actually checking and doing your due diligence, reviewing what you have, how the code works, comparing, how the old site is functioning, looking at the new site and going, does the site even function the same? Are the flows the same? Because your flows may even be different. Our checkout process for our subscriptions used to be wall to an express checkout page, or sorry, to a shop page, to an express checkout page, to a success page. And in between there was also like a third party, like take payments, which I couldn't even get full data granularity on. And now we're all in one site, and it's like literally wall, and there is a checkout right on the page if they want it. And the purchase is made on the same page. So knowing how the site is actually working is also going to drive how your rules are being built. And that will also affect your drill downs, your fallout reports. Because if your pathing has changed, if the number of steps has changed, if the type of steps has changed, you have to rebuild those, both from a coding and tracking perspective, but also from a reporting perspective. I hope that answered, or did I just confuse you more?
No. There's not one answer to it. So yeah, this helps. Thanks, Jen.
Okay, looks like the next one, Jen, was, this is from Rick. Can you give us a screenshot of that calculated metric? This was down at toward the end of your presentation. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, you just want to see the calculated metric again?
They want a screenshot of it. All right, go for it.
Like this screenshot of the calculated metric?
It was sent at 10:27. So yeah, it was toward the end of your presentation. So it may be that one.
Oh, yeah. Maybe they posted it before I actually sent this, but it is in the recording. Yeah. But I can absolutely show this in more detail if you have specific questions about it. I'd be happy to answer any, and I'll leave it up there if somebody's making furious notes about, or a screenshot of it because they want to use this.
It looks like that's the last question on there. Chase, do you see any others?
No, I think you hit them all.
Excellent. Oh, well, actually, somebody said they'd love to see the example documentation. Please share a documentation sample. I don't have a sample offhand without actually showing a real document, but if you post on Experience League, I am there daily. I would be happy to get together a sample for you, but I believe I also have some samples in the documentation Mission Possible presentation. So watch that. If you don't have enough samples, by all means, reach out to me on Experience League, and I'd be happy to walk you through some of what I do for my documentation.
I think the
Oh,
other screen,
yes.
I think the other screenshot we need is of your mug with the gummy worms there. Show us that again. What is going on? Okay, look, you got, okay, there's obviously Mountain Dew in the mug, and then there's some gummy worms. This is awesome. Okay, good.
Oh, wait.
Thanks, Jen. That was amazing.
There, do you want a screenshot of this?
Look at that. That's so good. I loving it. Okay, I think that was all the questions, Chase, unless you have others.
No, I think that was it. Does anybody else have any questions?
Yep, somebody would like the Experience League link, which I don't have handy because my screen is being shared like full screen. But yes, let me see if I can grab that for you. Oh, thank you. And yeah, that goes to the main one. This one goes straight to the Adobe Analytics one. So I normally haunt the Adobe Analytics, as you can probably tell. And I see that some more questions have come in today, so I'll probably be poking around at those after this session finishes. So,
You know, to Yinglu's point, I was going to say, Jen, that would be a great thing to have a number of different sessions linked out to Experience Lake that we have done in the past. I think it would be great service to have an expansion of those different sessions for all of the different chapters, to have those out here, because I think it would really create a lot of exposure. So
I think so.
Great point to have to bring that up.
Yeah. So maybe, yeah, like, so we've got a lot of recordings from both the NOM East, session that Jeff and I host together. Intermountain West has their recordings. You know, this will be recorded. Maybe we can get together and we can post like some discussion threads where we post out to some of the previous sessions. That would be helpful.
Definitely.
All right.
Awesome. Any other questions before we wrap up? Looks like you guys are in the clear, Jen and Nate. Well, thank you again, everybody, for hopping on today's event. The recording will go out as well and be posted on the Analytics YouTube page. And we will look at getting a thread posted as well for follow-up to this event for any other questions or anything else you guys might need. Thanks again for joining, and thank you to Jen and Nate for hosting this event. Really appreciate it. I hope you guys can show off your costumes in some later meetings today.
Yes. And well, thank you everyone for attending, because Halloween's usually a busy day, but we wanted to have some fun and have a themed event. So
Awesome. All right, y'all. Well, enjoy the rest of your guys' day, and we will chat here soon.
all right. Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Bye. Happy Halloween.